Hello YouTube, welcome to CSS for Page Layout Part 2. So in this video, what we are going to do is take our sections that we marked up in the previous video and change them into rectangular objects or blocks that we can then use to organize our page a little bit better. So before we do that, we're going to talk about something called the box model. So in Dreamweaver, I have a quick example here of some information, and it's simply some lorem ipsum inside a p tag, which is then nested inside a div, and we can see what that looks like here. Okay, I've given the information, the P element. I've changed the background property, the background color property, to give it this green tint. Now we can modify this so that it looks like a rectangle instead of just that bar that goes across the screen by giving it a width. So I'm going to uncomment my width property and my height property. Now if you don't specify the height, then the height of your block will just expand to be what it needs to be in order to fit your content. But when we constrain the width with type like this, the type will then wrap inside the new width. And here we go. We can see our width and height has been applied. So now that we have a rectangle, we can make all sorts of changes to this. We can change the background color, we can change the position, we can change the font element, but we can also change something called the padding and the margin. So an important piece of the box model is understanding how the size of our content is related to the padding, the margin, and the width of the border. So if I increase my padding, what this will do is create a channel around the type, so the green field will extend beyond the content. So it will actually become larger than our initial 300 pixels wide and 200 pixels tall. Let's preview that. And you can see that the green box actually got bigger. The type stayed roughly the same width. It did not wrap any differently. So the type, the content area is still 300 pixels, but we've added an extra 10 pixels onto both sides for the padding. Next, we're going to take we're going to add a border. So I'm going to uncomment my border. This is a red border, and the width is set to 10 pixels. So this border, if you're wondering what we've got here, when you write a border, it has three values or three properties that need to be set. That is the color, the style, which is set to solid, and then the weight, which we have here set to 10 pixels. So I've used the shortcut syntax where I just specify border and then the three values, and of course this will be applied to all four sides of our block. Let's preview that. And again, what you may have noticed there was that the page actually got, or the artwork shifted a bit because the color areas made it seem larger, but the text, again, the content still stays at our original size of 300 pixels. But now from the edge of the red border to the start of our type here, we have 10 pixels for padding and 10 pixels for the border width. So that's a total of 20 on this side and 20 on the right hand side, and then again that would be 20 on the top, and then in addition to our height box, 20 on the bottom. Now the last feature in our box model is the margin. So if I increase this margin by 10 pixels, we should get another space around the outside of our border. So this just shows up as a white space because that's the margin. So it does not show up as green. That would be the padding. Another important thing to note is how margins will interact when they're stacked on top of each other. So what I'll do is I'll go into my source code here, and I will actually copy and paste this so that we have two sections, one above the other. Okay, so let's refresh this, and we can see that we have our first paragraph and then our second paragraph. And let's preview this in Firefox. And here we go. What I'd like to call your attention to is the margin in between these two boxes. Every time we added the padding and the margin, it increased it on both the top and on the bottom. So the padding is 10 pixels here on the top and 10 pixels additional here on the bottom. The border is another 10 pixels, and the border width at the bottom is 10 pixels. When we get to the margins, the margin at the top is 10 and the margin at the bottom is 10, but that margin is not duplicated for the second object. What happens is when objects are placed on top of each other like this in CSS, the greater margin is the one that's used, and the additional margin space is ignored. So that's the basics behind the box model and how it works in CSS. Let's modify our example that we used in the previous video. So to begin, this is what we did last video. I'm going to remove these margins from our copy. So I have a body selector here, and I set my margin and padding to 0. I'm going to add in the p tag, the h1, the h2, and the ul, and that should remove all the margin and padding that we have outside of our boxes. There we go. So now we see this kind of flattened view. So as I resize the page, you'll see that my content reflows. Well, what I'd like to do is to create an overall page width, sort of a maximum width, and then allow anything, if my browser window is larger than that, for just to show a gray background. It's a really common technique found on the web. If I go into my source code, last time we marked up our sections, we identified our sections and nested them inside div tags and then assigned either a class or an ID. So what I've done here is I've actually just collapsed all of the content inside those divs because it's a little cleaner to read and it's not really necessary at this point. So first of all, looking at this example, one way I can center things is to just center the text with a text-align center, but that's not really going to look nice. What I want to do is I want to first constrain the maximum width and then center that box, these boxes on the page. So let's do that here. I'm going to go into my source code and I'm actually going to create a div that wraps around the entire page, like so. And we will give this an ID of page. Now when I go into my basic.css, I can set my selector #page, and I can specify the width of my page box, and everything else should flow inside it. So we'll use 1028 pixels. Let's preview this now. There we go. You can see that my width has now been constrained, and it's always going to remain that width. If I resize my browser, if I make it smaller, it's going to cut off, and I'll get the scroll bar. But if I increase the size of the browser window, the page does not expand to fill that. In the body selector, I will create my gray background with the background dash color, and we'll just use the CCC for a background color. And if we preview that, we should see our gray background around our boxes. Now the next step is to center our page. So again, with text align center, we can center the whole page. We could center the type, but that would not move our divs into the appropriate spot, and it would center our copy inside our divs, which isn't really what we're looking to do here. We want to keep the text align left, but we want to center our boxes. And we can do that inside the page selector by setting the margin to auto. There we go. And now that we've done that, we can see that our little bullets are hanging off the left. And that's because we set the margin for the UL to 0. So I'm not too concerned about that. We'll format that navigation bar in a later video. But that's basically how we can use the box model to organize our content into simple rectangular structures and then center it on the page. Thanks for watching.